Hey there, fight fans. Owlman here. We've got a special guest today in the fighter circle, Shayna Baszler. Known as the Queen of Spades, Shayna is a journeywoman in the world of mixed martial arts, fighting some of the who's who, a murderer's row, if you will, of opponents, and competing in cages and rings all over the world. While she's got plenty of fights under her belt, Shayna recently took a plunge into the world of professional wrestling. And she's set to take on training partner Colleen Schneider at Premier XII, March 6th. And without further ado, Shayna Baszler. Al Stover, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Doing good. You know, it is Friday, as our good friend Chris Jericho would say. It's Friday, so...
Right.
Right on. Right on. So yeah, I guess if we're ready, we can get into the nitty-gritty of all this. You know, you're known to many as a badass mixed martial arts fighter, one of the pioneers of the women's division, you know, and you've a journeyman or journeywoman of sorts, fighting everywhere, most recently the UFC. But kind of in the last year, you've been making your mark in the world of professional wrestling, or as some would call it, sports entertainment. And you know, we know you're a pro wrestling fan. Through and through. What kind of made you decide to finally take the plunge into the squared circle? You know, you made a few appearances here and there, but what was it that finally made you decide? All right, I'm ready to do this.
Well, I mean, MMA is pro wrestling, and I think if you look back at the history of catch wrestling and the early forms of fighting pancrase and all that, it's all one and the same. So I think it's just a natural thing to be able to do once the opportunity presented itself. And you know, I'm a lifelong fan and also a catch wrestling practitioner, so I have a long line of pro wrestlers in my martial lineage. So it happened really easy and really naturally. It wasn't like there was never like, I don't know, should I do this? I want to try this. It's just the next step.
Well, right. I think I read that you also trained under the late great Billy Robinson. And,
I was besides Megumi, I was the first female to be certified under Billy in catch wrestling. So I always like to say there was a point in time where I was the only female catch wrestler in the United States. But it's not true anymore. He had a few more females, and then Wade Shawless now and Jake Shannon with Scientific Wrestling are carrying on his certification program and his legacy and such. And so there's many girls now, but yeah, I was one of the few that had the honor of actually training directly with him.
Yeah, I mean it's you know pretty exclusive club and a high honor. You know, Billy regarded as one of the best, and you know, you even watch some of his matches, they still hold up. But and kind of going back a little bit too, you know, every great pro wrestling fan has kind of that spark that got him interested, whether it was a wrestler, a specific match, or a memory. For you, what was it? Because I remember we've kind of exchanged tweets back and forth about, you know, you said you like all this stuff. You know, it's not just about one thing. But what was that initial spark for you that got you interested in this?
I think I was really, really young, and I think when Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior had their feud and it culminated in their match, and Ultimate Warrior won, and he had both belts, and he was leaving, and they were like blowing each other kisses and saying "I love you" to each other and stuff. That was like the first. I was really young. I don't remember what year it was, but I remember I was really young as a kid. And I remember during the whole build-up getting into arguments with my dad because he just laughed and thought it was silly, and I loved watching it. And I think that was the moment after that match, and they kind of broke character almost. And it was, you know, that was before they were still sticking with the kayfabe that it was all they nowadays everyone knows, like,
right.
it's scripted. And back then they weren't admitting that yet openly. And so I just remember that's kind of the moment for me when the fourth wall came down, and I didn't even realize that's what was happening, but I was like, wow, these guys did a huge thing together. Like, I had this, I don't know, I just got to, like, a next level understanding of pro wrestling beyond just like, oh, these two, and we don't know if they're fighting for real or not. You know, it was like, I don't know, it's funny to me because pro wrestling fans, I mean, everybody knows it's scripted.
Right.
But pro wrestling fans have, this is going to sound really dumb to anyone that's not a pro wrestling fan, but the pro wrestling fans have a higher understanding of what pro wrestling is than people that just kind of throw it away like, oh, that's that fake stuff.
Right.
Well, that's not even it. Like, there's a different level of appreciation and understanding to a true pro wrestling fan. And I think that, even as a young kid, that was my first taste of it. And I didn't understand it at the time, but in retrospect, I think I was like, wow, these guys, like, look at his paint. His paint is all the way off his face. They worked so hard, you know. And honestly, looking back at that match now, it's kind of like whatever. You know what I mean? It's not like the greatest match of all time. But just the build-up and everything, and just my understanding of pro wrestling touched on that kind of higher level understanding of it for the first time. And I think that was the moment where things started changing for me as I watched.
And with that match too, I mean, I remember being 6 years old. It was because I remember watching that too, and the build-up, and I think it was 1990 because I got it for my 6th birthday or something like that, but or 5th. But yeah, and that feud itself too, because it was kind of the first time that, you know, it was a good guy versus good guy. They never did anything like that before, and especially with Hulk Hogan. Yeah. Hulk Hogan's adversaries were always so, you know, they were heels. They were the bad guys, the monsters. But yeah, no, I kind of see what you're saying too, and you know, with that moment with Warrior and Hogan, it's like, here we did this beautiful thing together. You know, it's kind of like watching, you know, a theater, a play or something, and actors who just work their tails off to create something special. Create, as the late great Dusty Rhodes would say, a moment, if you will. You know, a moment.
Right.
But okay, so let's kind of fast forward to now too. And I wanted to make sure, was the match with Melissa Anderson your first pro wrestling match, or?
Yeah, I had my first match was with Cheerleader Melissa.
Cheerleader Melissa. Sorry, I broke it, babe. And for you,
right.
For you, what was that like? Because, you know, Melissa is she's known on the indie scene, and for someone who is a connoisseur of women's wrestling, you know who she is. You know, she had a cup of coffee or she had a little run in TNA where she wasn't Cheerleader Melissa, but you know, I think she was the NWA Women's Champion. I know she had in Shimmer. Kind of for you, what was that like, stepping in with someone who, you know, has a lot of experience and has a lot of mileage?
Well, first of all, it was a really big honor because, especially in the pro wrestling world, it's not something that happens often, where she's not just really experienced, but she's highly decorated and well respected in the indie world. And she didn't have to accept a match with me, you know? And I think that that's a big deal in the first place. But on top of that, it put a lot of pressure on me because I didn't want to be, you know, she's this highly touted, highly respected vet, and two sides to it. I didn't want her to feel like I was coming in like, I've been doing this stuff, I know everything, I can do this, this is easy, you know. I want to give respect to the sport and the art, and I wanted her to understand that I wasn't coming in like I deserved to be on the same level as her or anything, but at the same time, I put a lot of time in MMA, and like I was talking about before, it's really the same thing. It's just two sides of the same coin, and so just kind of accepting that, I'm not green like everybody else is green, and getting comfortable with myself. And I'm glad it was her, because, it gave me a chance to be comfortable with myself in there, because I didn't have to worry about all the little things. Whereas if I was maybe working with a less experienced girl, I would have had a lot more things to worry about, and I maybe wouldn't have been as comfortable in there for my first match.
Right, and you kind of talk about that too, MMA being, two sides of the coin, and it is a lot of it too, and pro wrestlers and MMA, pro wrestlers kind of go back and forth between MMA, maybe not so much here in the States. I mean, you got Josh Barnett, but like in Japan, it's a lot more people do it. Nakamura, who's coming to NXT, which is going to be awesome. He's got an MMA background, and he was able to, kind of help that transition into his character. But and how did training for MMA, or I guess your experience, because I knew you trained with Josh Barnett, and how did that kind of help prepare you for this match?
Well, it's funny because pro wrestling and MMA training, especially for me, like you said, training with Josh, who's a pro wrestler fighter, it's all very much the same. I don't do a lot different. I maybe learned some different throws and some different types of things, but as far as the conditioning aspect and I still do pro practice every day. I'm not done fighting, so there's still that. It's really just a lot of the same training. There's some things I don't have to worry about. I don't have to make weight for pro wrestling. Now, that's a good and bad thing because I don't have to make weight, but there's no weight classes, so I have to be prepared for very tiny, fast girls and very large, big, strong girls. And there's no time limit on wrestling matches for the most part. I mean, obviously there's special stipulations and things like that, but where, for MMA, it's like, okay, I'm training for a specific style of opponent, have to make weight, and it's 3 5-minute rounds. So it's very targeted towards that specific set, whereas in pro wrestling, it's a generalized conditioning. Like, I have to be ready to go 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, against a girl who could be bigger. I have to be able to keep up with a girl who's faster for that time. So it's a lot of the same stuff. I just maybe my strength conditioning isn't as pinpoint targeted towards a specific time frame and making a certain weight. But for the most part, the rest of it is all the same stuff.
All right, right on. And then also too, after Melissa, your match with Melissa too, I think you were also wrestling in ECCW in Canada. I had a buddy who started out there a while ago, and what was that experience like? Going to wrestle in the Great North.
ECCW is so awesome. And for people that maybe are familiar with NBC, it's kind of the big show to wrestle at in the Pacific Northwest. It's in Vancouver, so it's right over the border. So you get a lot of Seattle and that those people up there come up just to watch the show. I mean, the last match I had against Nicole Matthews, there was like 1,200 people. It's a great, and they're a very dedicated audience, and that's one of the great things I love about indie wrestling is you get these very dedicated hardcore audiences, so they're very into it, and it's just a hot crowd, and they have a really proven event. They've been around for I don't know exactly how long they've been around, but it's been a while, right? And there's a lot of names that people know work at ECCW. Natalia was there, Daniel Bryan was there, Kyle O'Reilly, a lot of really great. Becky Lynch, she worked up there. So there's a lot of great wrestlers that started there. So it's comforting to know that it's a great organization and that I'm on the right path if I want to move on and do big things in this.
Cool. And then you also had a match in Japan, didn't you? Or
Japan. I don't know.
Okay.
No, I had Stardom came over. Stardom is the organization in Japan that came and did a tour in the U.S. and I worked their U.S. shows.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right on. And then kind of fast forward to now. You talked about, working with an established veteran. You got your match coming up with Colleen, and I think it's her actual pro wrestling debut. I was kind of wondering, how did that match come about? Was it something that you suggested? Did she come to you? Did the promoter come to you guys, or?
No, I mean, Josh handled all of it, I think, talking, because he was like, hey, you two are wrestling each other again, because we train all the time, we're training partners, obviously, and then we fought on the Ultimate Fighter to get in the house, and so she's, we come from the Josh Barnett lineage, and like I've been saying, to Josh, fighting and wrestling are the same exact thing. So he's like, you know everything. You guys can do it. Just go in there, do your thing, and it's going to be cool because it's like you were saying, in the West, it's not as popular that fighters and pro wrestlers do both. So I feel like the match that people are going to see between me and Colleen is going to be something they're not going to see very often, because we'll be able to do a lot of things that we won't be able to do with anybody else. So.
Right, and you guys, you kind of answered one of my questions too about what's it going to be like, because it's her first time wrestling. But it sounds like you guys train together a lot, and a lot of times in the past we've seen wrestlers who are really good friends have matches and put on pretty good shows. I think in the not to plug myself, but in the column I wrote, I made reference to Shawn Michaels and Diesel, Arn Anderson and Ric Flair, and yeah, it sounds like it should be really interesting too. And with Premier Wrestling, because that had been the first time I heard of it too, there are records. They actually stick to kayfabe pretty well. But what's your kind of impression of the promotion?
They've been great, just corresponding and working with. And I feel like if you watch some of their stuff, if you can, hunt down their stuff on YouTube or whatnot, it's a lot of shoot style looking wrestling, and it's not going to be anything like you'd see, turn on Raw on Mondays or something, or even a lot of indie stuff is crazy, triple moonsaults off the turnbuckle onto the chairs or something. It's not like that. A lot of it is, a guy, Tim Thatcher, he comes and trains with Josh. He's a very shoot style catch wrestler. He wrestles up there, and just the style of matches in general, from what I'm gathering, are a lot more shoot looking, and it's just, it's if people have never been to a wrestling show that isn't the WWE, and they can get to a show like this, or it's a total different experience. There's some things I equate it to hockey a lot, where you have to experience it live. It's just not the same watching it on TV. There's something about being there live, and really, regardless, I've been to hundreds of wrestling shows, and there's only like 2 that I can really say that I roll my eyes at and say it wasn't worth going. So it's a good time, and Premier's gonna, especially for people that maybe they're my fan from fighting and they're just following me around because they're my fans from MMA. If you're looking to get into a pro wrestling show, this would be one to go to, because from my understanding of it, it's a shoot style look. It's going to be a lot of the same type of stuff that you would see in an MMA event. So.
Right on. And then you kind of alluded to this earlier. As far as we're gonna see you back in the cage or the ring, fighting ring anytime soon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not done fighting. I'm just. It's an interesting thing. This is an interesting topic. Is that if you fight for the UFC, unless you're Ronda, pretty much, you fight like once a year, and so when you have bills to pay and you want to stay busy and you're working out every day, you want to do stuff. Right. So I like pro wrestling. I like that you have to be in the same type of shape. And so if I'm gonna have to sit on the bench, I just as well do stuff that's active while I can, you know? Wrestling and fighting are very short-lived careers as far as an age timeline, so I want to get in as much as I can before that clock runs out, you know?
Right. I mean, it's like what Jim Ross says. I mean, any athlete, you know, you have a shelf life, and you know, and then I guess with wrestling too, and you know, like you said, wrestling is like MMA. You know, there are fighters. You know, we're starting to see it now, especially in wrestling, that, you know, guys like the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega. Before the Royal Rumble, I would have said AJ Styles, because I never thought I'd see him in the WWE. But, you know, guys like that, you know, are able to make a living outside of WWE. You know, I think MMA is different, but I mean, I think we might be able to get to a point like that. You know, and speaking of wrestling, I guess brings me to this too. You know, what are your goals in wrestling? You know, do you kind of want to? Do you ever plan on being at the show someday, or, you know, Japan, or, you know?
I think, you know, I think back to this because it's easy for me. It would be easy for me to say, you know, I wanna go to the WFG, but the truth is, I love wrestling the way I loved fighting when I first started fighting. And when I first started fighting, the UFC wasn't an option, and I just loved fighting. And I think it's good for me to stick to that right now, because whether I want to go to the WWE or not, I need to get this. I need to get my name out there. And like I said, I want to pay my dues. Right. I want to give respect to the other wrestlers that have been on the indie grind for like 10 years, you know? I don't want to like jump the line and toot my horn and like be all about the fame that the WWE gets you. It's not that. I just love wrestling. And so I would love to use it like MMA was for me, to travel and experience things and, you know, add to the stories that I'll tell my grandchildren one day. And that's really the bottom line is, this is kind of stick with me here, this is kind of a stretch, but when that crazy like 1.5 billion jackpot for the Powerball was happening, and we were all kind of sitting around joking around about what we do, and I was like, you know, the truth is, I wouldn't buy a great big house, I feel like I would like pay for me and my friends to go do a bunch of stuff, because really it's just memories, right? Like, you just want stories. That's really the cool thing. And I think in the end, that's really what I want with wrestling. And whether that takes me to the WWE or whatever, that's neither here nor there. I just want stories. Like, I just want to collect stories.
That's cool. That's cool. And, you know, I mean, and when I say that, you know, that is wrestling is a career that can do that. I mean, you hear about guys traveling all over the world. I mean, there's so much, you know, and WWE is great too, but like there's so much out there. It's, you know, there's Japan, there's Mexico, there's Europe, which, I mean, you know, and that's even England, Ireland, you know, a lot of these cats you're seeing come to the WWE now, that's where they came from, that's where they started. You know, so that's pretty cool, you know.
Especially now, and, you know, with Triple H and NXT, and he's dipping more into the indies. And I think if people really want to go in a black hole, and you know the styles all over the world of pro wrestling, and you see where these guys come from, you can see that style of wrestling in their style. A case in point is like Daniel Bryan. He's a very he came up through Japan and Ring of Honor, and you can see that in his wrestling style. Whereas someone like Dean Ambrose came up on the Puerto Rican CZW side, and it's just more of a brawler. Right. That style is more of a brawler style, and you can see it in the way they wrestle in the WWE. And I think that stuff is so interesting. So, you know, picking my path, if I want to go there, it's going to be interesting to see how I develop and what I become as a pro wrestler.
Right on. Aside from pro wrestling, any other projects you have lined up, or anything else got going on, or?
No, I'm wrestling and fighting and working on the War Wagon, and that's and trying to discover every building that exists in Fallout 4. Those are my current projects right now.
Yeah, hey, you're talking to the guy who's trying to complete his Pokédex before the next game drops. So.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank Shayna Baszler for taking time out of her Friday night and stopping by the Fighter Circle. Best of luck to you in your upcoming match, and to all the fight fans out there, have a good night.